What happens when a broken man living in isolation is suddenly faced with a fierce group of warriors seeking refuge? This is a story of courage, betrayal, and the fight for justice, a journey where survival means more than just staying alive. Stay with us to discover how one man's heart is awakened in the darkest storm. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss the incredible stories of courage and hope coming your way. Elias Mercer had lived as a recluse for nearly a decade, a man frozen in time and silence. His cabin, tucked deep within the rugged wilderness of the Wild West, had become his entire world. Every creaking floorboard, every weathered wall carried the weight of a life suspended between grief and memory, a soft prison he had built around himself to escape a past too heavy to bear. The fire crackled quietly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced along the rough wooden walls, while Elias stared into the orange glow without really seeing it. His eyes were distant, lost somewhere in the vast emptiness of what he had lost. He still remembered the day everything fell apart, the house set ablaze, the blood-curdling screams, the flames consuming his family. Since that day, the outside world had been no more than a distant threat, one he guarded against by becoming a shadow, a ghost hidden in the heart of nature. That night, as a storm rumbled on the horizon, an unusual sound shattered the silence, the fragile snap of branches beneath hurried footsteps, muffled voices trembling with fear. Elias snapped upright, breath quickened, every muscle tensed by instinct. Something was coming. He opened the door slowly, expecting perhaps a wild animal, a fierce wind, or nothing at all. But what he saw stopped him cold. 10 women, faces marked by exhaustion yet fierce determination, cloaked against the driving rain, standing at his doorstep. They were not broken victims, but warriors, fierce and untamed souls. Their eyes, despite the fear that lingered, burned with an unquenchable fire. The leader of the group, a tall woman named Nina, stepped forward with quiet confidence, speaking not a word but conveying a story through her gaze alone. Elias felt his heart tighten. These women were not just seeking shelter, they carried a strength he thought he'd long forgotten. He hesitated, weighed down by years of isolation. To open his door meant breaking the fragile shell of solitude he had woven around himself. But to close it would condemn them. Without a word he stepped aside, letting the warriors enter, a silent gesture that marked the beginning of a profound change, the start of a battle far greater than himself. That night, beneath the pounding rain and the distant roar of thunder, Elias Mercer was no longer a man alone. He became the guardian of a cause, the silent witness to a fight for justice, and the promise of a new beginning. Sometimes, even the most broken souls find in meeting others the spark needed to reignite life. The rain hammered relentlessly against the roof, each drop like a drumbeat echoing the turmoil inside the small cabin. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and smoke, mingling with the tense silence that filled the room. Elias watched the women move quietly around him, their bodies weary but their eyes sharp and alert. Each carried the weight of a journey too brutal to speak of, yet in their presence, a fragile thread of hope began to weave itself through the cold walls. Nina, the leader, stood near the cracked window, her gaze fixed on the shadowy forest beyond. Her face, etched with years of struggle and courage, was both fierce and gentle. Elias noticed how she shifted the small bundle in her arms, a child, asleep despite the chaos, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The child's quiet breathing was a fragile beacon amidst the storm raging outside and within their hearts. Though Elias had long retreated from the world, a part of him stirred at the sight of their resilience. He saw not just survivors but warriors bound by loyalty and unspoken stories of loss and defiance. He felt the ache of solitude ease ever so slightly, replaced by an unfamiliar warmth, a responsibility that pressed against his ribs. The women spoke little, their whispered exchanges heavy with urgency and caution. Outside, the forest groaned under the wind, branches scraping like desperate fingers against the cabin walls. Elias felt the tension coil tighter with every passing moment, knowing that the soldiers hunting them would not be far behind. Nina finally broke the silence, her voice low but unwavering. "They will come," she said, "and they will not be merciful." Elias nodded slowly. The world he had fled from was crashing back in, but now he was no longer alone to face it. In the flicker of the firelight, he saw something else, a reflection of his own buried courage, awakened by these fierce souls who had chosen his refuge over surrender. The storm outside was unrelenting, but inside the cabin, a new kind of battle had begun, one fought not with weapons alone, but with the fragile strength of trust, hope, and the fierce will to survive. The forest around the cabin had grown eerily quiet, the usual chorus of night creatures silenced as if nature itself was holding its breath. Elias stood near the doorway, every sense alert to the dark that pressed in from all sides. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the air was heavy with impending danger. Through the skeletal branches, faint shapes emerged, figures moving with calculated purpose. The soldiers had come. Led by Captain Hayes, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was whispered even among his own men, they advanced cautiously, aware that their prey was no ordinary group. Inside the cabin, tension thickened the air like a tangible force. Nina gathered the women close, their faces shadowed but resolute. Weapons were silently checked, arrows nocked, knives gripped tighter. The weight of what was to come pressed down on them, a storm darker than the one outside. Elias's heart thundered, not with fear, but with a fierce determination that surprised him. For years, he had buried his pain under layers of isolation, but now, standing shoulder to shoulder with these warriors, the old fire ignited. This was no longer about survival, it was about justice, about fighting for those who had been hunted and broken. Outside, Captain Hayes signaled, and the soldiers split, encircling the cabin with deliberate stealth. Each shadow that flickered past the windows was a reminder that the trap was closing. But Elias and the women had their own plans. They knew the forest, they knew the night, and they were ready. As the first soldier crept close, a barely audible signal passed through the group, a breath held, a nod shared. Then, in an explosion of movement, the quiet night erupted into chaos. Arrows whistled through the air, footsteps pounded against the earth, and battle cries shattered the silence. In that moment, fear was swallowed by fury and resolve. Elias fought not just with his hands, but with the weight of every memory that had driven him here. The women fought like the spirits of the land itself, unyielding, fierce, unbreakable. The shadows had come to claim them, but they would find only fire. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, the night cloaked in a heavy silence that pressed upon the land like a breath held tight. Elias stood at the edge of the clearing, heart pounding with a mix of fear and fierce determination. Around him, the Apache women moved with the precision of warriors who had honed their skills in 1,000 battles, every muscle taut, every eye sharp as the blade hidden beneath a cloak. They had spent days preparing, using the forest itself as their ally, setting traps in the underbrush, camouflaging pitfalls, and marking escape routes known only to those who had grown up with the land beneath their feet. This was not a desperate flight, but a calculated stand. The first shadows of the soldiers appeared beyond the tree-line, cautious and unaware. Captain Hayes led his men forward, arrogance masking the creeping dread beneath his calm exterior. He expected to find frightened refugees, easy prey to be rounded up and returned to a system that cared nothing for their lives. But Elias and the women were no victims. With a signal, a sharp whistle slicing through the night, hidden arrows rained down from the trees. Soldiers cried out, stumbling into snares woven from thick vines. Panic rippled through the ranks as the trap sprang shut, tightening like a noose. Elias moved through the chaos like a ghost, striking where needed, protecting the vulnerable. Nina's voice rang clear, fierce commands weaving through the din of battle. The night air filled with the clash of steel and the cries of men caught unprepared. Captain Hayes, caught in the heart of the trap, fought with desperate fury, but even his strength was no match for the coordinated assault. Elias watched as the captain fell, the last breath escaping in a ragged gasp. The fight was brief but decisive. When the dust settled, the forest was eerily still once more, save for the ragged breaths of survivors and the distant echo of thunder. But even in victory, a cold shadow fell over Elias's heart, the knowledge that this was only the beginning, and that a greater storm was on its way. The trap was set, but the true battle had yet to come. The dawn barely pierced the heavy gray sky when the distant rumble of boots on hard earth shattered the fragile calm. Elias stood among the survivors, his muscles still tense from the night's brutal fight, eyes fixed on the horizon where a new threat approached, larger, more ruthless, and far less forgiving than the captain they had just defeated. Colonel Thompson's regiment appeared like a dark wave rolling over the hills, a force of soldiers clad in steel and resolve, encircling the homestead with cold precision. The air grew thick with the smell of wet leather and gunpowder, mingled with the unspoken dread that settled over every heart present. The colonel himself emerged from the ranks, stern, unyielding, his gaze as sharp and unforgiving as the edge of a blade. His voice cut through the tension like a whip. "Surrender now," he demanded, "and no harm will come to any of you." But Elias saw the lie in his eyes, the hunger for power that masked any promise of mercy. He knew surrender meant a slow death, a return to chains forged by cruelty and corruption. Around him, the Apache women gathered, faces set like stone, their grip on weapons tightening. Nina's gaze met his, a silent vow passing between them, they would not bow. As the soldiers tightened their circle, Elias felt a fierce storm rise within him, not just of rage, but of something deeper, hope tempered by courage. This was no longer a fight for mere survival. It was a battle for truth, justice, and the chance to reclaim dignity stolen by years of oppression. In the gathering shadows, he vowed to stand firm, to fight not only for those beside him but for the countless voices silenced in the darkness. The greater threat had arrived, but so had their resolve. And sometimes, the fiercest storms revealed the strongest warriors. The night was heavy with tension, the kind that presses against the chest and steals the breath. Inside the battered cabin, the flicker of a small fire cast long shadows on the walls, but it was the young man sitting quietly in the corner who drew Elias's attention, Lieutenant Daniel Thompson, son of the very colonel who now demanded their surrender. Daniel's hands trembled slightly, his uniform stained and torn, eyes wide with fear and confusion. He was a boy caught in a storm far bigger than himself, thrust unwillingly into a world of violence and betrayal. His youth and vulnerability contrasted sharply with the cold authority his father wielded like a weapon. Nina sat across from him, her posture both firm and strangely gentle. She spoke softly, her voice a calm current beneath the chaos, explaining that here, no harm would come to him if he chose to listen. Daniel's gaze flickered between the faces around him, warriors who had fought fiercely to protect their own, yet offered him an unexpected mercy. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady but compassionate. He shared what the others had lived through, the truth hidden beneath layers of military orders and propaganda. Slowly, Daniel's defenses began to crumble. The boy who had been raised to obey without question started to see the shadows that had long cloaked his father's actions. Hours passed, and with each word, a fragile trust grew. Daniel's fear gave way to something harder to define, a dawning awareness and a desperate hope that his choice could make a difference. To testify against his father was to betray blood, but to remain silent was to betray conscience. That night, in the quiet between storms, an unlikely captive became the fragile bridge between worlds, a young man caught between duty and truth, fear and courage. Elias and Nina exchanged a glance filled with both uncertainty and resolve. They knew the path ahead would be perilous, but for the first time in a long while, hope took root in the darkness. The dim light of dawn crept through the cracked windows, casting pale shadows over the small room where Elias and Lieutenant Daniel sat facing each other. The weight of the night's conversations lingered in the air, heavy, electric, as if the very walls held their breath. Daniel's eyes, once clouded with confusion and fear, now shone with a fragile determination that unsettled Elias in the most profound way. Daniel's hands rested on the rough wooden table, fingers twitching slightly as he grappled with the storm raging inside him. Every word he had absorbed, every truth revealed by Elias and the women, tore at the foundation of his upbringing. The man he had admired, his father, Colonel Thompson, was no longer a figure of honor, but of cruelty and corruption. The choice before him was devastating. To speak out meant betrayal, betrayal of blood, of family, of everything he had been taught to hold sacred. Yet silence felt like complicity, a consent to the injustice and suffering inflicted upon innocent lives. Elias watched him struggle, heart aching with the weight of this impossible decision. He saw the flicker of pain and courage, the moment when a boy crossed the threshold into a man who would stand for truth, no matter the cost. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, as if nature itself mourned and protested the cruelty of men. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper but steady with resolve. "I can't let this continue," he said. "I won't be a part of it." The room seemed to exhale, the tension easing into a fragile hope. Plans were made, careful, dangerous plans, to bring Daniel's testimony to light, to pierce the veil of lies surrounding Colonel Thompson's reign. But the path ahead was treacherous. Elias knew that once Daniel spoke, there would be no turning back. Forces far greater than any of them would move to silence him. Yet in that moment, amidst the quiet determination and the fragile dawn, the breaking point had been reached. Truth would no longer be shackled by fear. The morning sun struggled to break through thick, gray clouds as federal troops arrived, their boots crunching on the muddy earth surrounding the battered cabin. Elias stood among the gathered women and Daniel, watching silently as the weight of justice began to settle over the land they had fought so fiercely to protect. The air was heavy, not just with rain-soaked earth, but with the gravity of truth finally emerging from years of darkness. Colonel Thompson was brought forward, his once imposing figure now diminished beneath the sharp eyes of investigators and the murmurs of those who had suffered under his command. The evidence was undeniable: testimonies, hidden documents, and the courage of a young lieutenant willing to confront his own blood. As the accusations unfolded, a silence descended, a silence filled with disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of relief. Faces once hardened by fear softened with the first glimpse of hope in what felt like an eternity. Elias caught Nina's eye, and in that fleeting moment, the years of pain, struggle, and sacrifice crystallized into something unspoken but deeply understood. This reckoning was not just for themselves, but for every voice silenced, every injustice ignored. The colonel's fall was swift and absolute. His career shattered, his name forever stained by the weight of his crimes. The soldiers who had once marched blindly under his banner now faced the consequences of their actions. Though victory was hard-won, it came with scars. The women knew the fight to rebuild their lives was only beginning, but for the first time in a long while, the future held a fragile promise. Elias, standing amidst the survivors, felt the stirrings of a new purpose, a path forged not only through loss but through the fierce, unyielding spirit of those who dared to fight for justice. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a warm golden light over a land still healing from the scars of battle and betrayal. Elias stood at the edge of what once was his home, now little more than smoldering ruins tangled with the wild growth of reclaiming nature. The quiet crackle of embers whispered the past sorrow, but beyond the ashes, a new dawn was breaking. Around him, the Apache women moved with a resolute grace, their faces etched with both exhaustion and determination. Though they had been granted protection and reparations, their hearts remained restless. The land held too many memories stained by loss and bloodshed. Together they chose not to rebuild here, but to seek a fresh start in a place untouched by pain, a sanctuary where healing could grow free from shadows. Elias watched as Nina spoke softly to the others, her voice a blend of hope and resolve. Their decision stirred something deep within him, a reflection of his own journey from isolation toward connection and purpose. The solitude that had once suffocated him now seemed like a distant chapter, closed yet never forgotten. As the group gathered their few belongings, Elias felt Mara, the young woman he had saved during the fight, step beside him. Her presence was a quiet promise, a living symbol of survival, resilience, and the fragile beauty of new life. Her baby slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of the upheaval that surrounded them, yet carrying within a hope for a future none dared to guarantee before. Together, they turned their backs on the ruins and the ghosts of the past, stepping toward an uncertain horizon. Every step was heavy with the weight of history, but lightened by the spark of possibility. Elias's heart, once hardened by grief, now beat with renewed purpose. This journey was more than a flight from destruction, it was a rebirth. A choice to embrace humanity's enduring strength despite the pain. A vow to protect, to fight, and to hope. In that moment, beneath the sprawling sky of the West, new beginnings stretched endlessly before them, fragile, beautiful, and fiercely alive. The horizon stretched wide and endless before them, painted with the soft hues of dawn that promised a new beginning. Elias Mercer stood beside Mara, the young woman whose courage had become a beacon through the darkest nights, and her sleeping baby cradled gently in her arms. The ruins of the past lay far behind, swallowed by time and wild growth, while the open trail ahead beckoned with the uncertain whispers of hope and renewal. Elias felt the weight of his journey pressing on his shoulders. Years of solitude, loss, and silence had carved deep lines into his soul. Yet now, standing among these new companions, something within him stirred, a fierce resolve that had long been buried beneath grief. To protect this fragile family, to defend those who could not fight for themselves, was no longer a burden but a calling. The path forward was not promised to be easy. The world beyond the mountains was vast and often unforgiving. Shadows of old enemies still lingered, and the scars of betrayal and violence ran deep. But Elias understood that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to walk through it. With every step, he embraced the fragile humanity that connected them all, the stubborn flame of compassion that refused to be extinguished. Mara looked up at him with eyes bright yet wary, a silent pact forming between them. In that glance, Elias saw a reflection of his own hope, a determination to rebuild not only a life but a legacy of resilience and justice. The baby stirred, reaching out with tiny fingers as if sensing the promise woven into the morning light. Together, they ventured into the unknown, hearts tethered by trust and the unspoken vow to face whatever trials lay ahead. Elias carried with him the lessons of the past, that sometimes the greatest battles were fought within, and that choosing to remain human, to fight with empathy and honor, was the most profound rebellion of all. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the songs of those who had come before and those yet to come. It was a call to rise, to protect, to endure. And so, beneath the vast sky of the west, Elias, Mara, and the child stepped forward, into a future carved from the ashes of sorrow and lit by the unwavering light of hope. Elias's story reminds us that even in the deepest shadows, hope can take root, that courage is born not from strength alone, but from the choice to stand for what is right. In a world filled with darkness and injustice, sometimes the greatest battle is to remain human. This tale of sacrifice, resilience, and rebirth is a testament to the power of compassion to change lives and rewrite destinies. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe for more powerful tales that inspire and uplift. Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. Together, let's keep hope alive.